In this video, I'm going to continue on my series of going through specific lures and the equipment that I like to use for them. Now today we're talking about a Wacky rig. The Wacky rig is probably one of the most used techniques, lures for bass fishing across the board. Whether you are just getting into bass fishing, you've been fishing your entire life, a lot of us have a Wacky rig tied up and ready to go at all times. Today, I just want to go over my simple system that I like to use and why I like to use it, why I think it helps me to catch more fish on a Wacky rig. Now, before we get into the video, this one's brought to you by Omnia Fishing, and really special announcement from Omnia. Today and tomorrow, they are running a sale on all of their Strike King products. So right now at Omnia, you can get all Strike King products for 25% off. And I love Strike King lures. Like, I love a lot of their products. I love all of their crankbaits pretty much. I love all of their top waters. I love their jigs. I love their plastics. Like, I love a lot of Strike King lures. And right now is a great time if you have some Strike Kings that you want to pick up, or you just want to save some money and pick up a lot of tackle. Click that link down below in the description. You can save 25%. And well, you're gonna save some money. So, all right, let's get into the Wacky rig. This is a very simple rig. Obviously, a lot of you know how to rig up the Wacky rig, but that's not what this video is about. It's really about the rod, reel, and line that I like to use with my Wacky rig fishing. Now, there is, I feel like, a little bit more leeway when it comes to the Wacky rig. I think that you can get away with a lot. Like, some guys are gonna have vastly different setups than I do, and I think that's just because this rig is weightless, it's a single hook, and you're going to typically get a good hook in these fish almost no matter what system that you're using. Now, I have a really specific reason why I like this setup right here, and we're going to go through that right now, starting with the rod. Now, this particular rod is an Arc Cobb series, and it's called the Kinda Shaky rod. Now, this particular rod was actually made for shaky head fishing. For me, I use this for about 90% of the finesse fishing that I do, whether that's a shaky head, a Nico rig, drop shots, and a Wacky rig. It's a very versatile rod, and like I said, I fish a ton of finesse techniques on this, finesse swim baits. There's a ton of the reasons I use this specific rod. Now, the rod itself is 7 foot 1 inch in length. I really like that length because when you're fishing a Wacky rig, you really never know how you're going to be using that rig. You know, a lot of times I'm going to be skipping this underneath docks and in tight and close to cover. And in those situations, typically the shorter rods that you go with, a little bit more accurate that you're going to be. So sometimes those 6 foot 6 inch to 6 foot 8, 9, 10 inch, 7 foot rods, anything in that is really going to be ideal for fishing that rod really close to cover. But there are a lot of times that I have a Wacky rig tied up that I like to make really long bomb casts with a Wacky rig. And there's two big reasons for that. One is stealth. Stealth is very, very important when it comes to fishing. And so if I'm fishing along a pond, I want to make the longest cast that I can a lot of times, because that is what is going to help you to truly get more bites. So having a little bit more length on your rod typically will help you to cast a little bit further. Now, with that being said, another reason I like long casts is because I use the Wacky rig a ton as a topwater follow-up bait. If I'm throwing any type of topwater and a fish blows up and misses it, the best thing that you can do is throw a Wacky rig at that fish instead of trying to repeat that same cast with your topwater bait. A lot of times if that fish missed it, there's a reason that they missed it, and they will miss it again, or they won't even hit it again. Now, that's not an always, but a lot of times if I can get a Wacky rig on that fish quickly at a long cast, I can usually catch that fish. So that's why I like using a little bit longer rods or making longer casts. So that's why that 7 foot 1 inch to me is really kind of the perfect length. You can use it really tight to cover. You can also make long casts. I really like that length. Now, this particular action, well, let's talk about the power real quick. This is a medium power rod. So to me, again, it's kind of that overall good power rod. You know, you could get away with a medium light, you could get away with probably a medium heavy, but the medium to me is perfect with a lot of the finesse techniques that I fish, as well as a Wacky rig. Now, the action of this rod most of your finesse techniques that you're out there, all the ones that I just talked about, you know, the Ned rig, the Wacky rig, the Nico rig, the drop shot, these are single hooked baits. And when I'm using a single hooked lure of some sort, I typically like a rod that has a kind of what you would call a fast action to it, or a moderate fast at best. So this is a fast action rod. It's a medium heavy or a medium power, and to me it's a really, really great rod. Now if I like to use finesse techniques, this is besides the point. If I'm using finesse techniques like with treble hooks, for example, here is a spy bait right here, I like a more parabolic bend to my rods, but we're not talking about spy baits. I'm just giving you a little bit of extra right there. All right, so let's move on to the reel. The reel, to me, you know, I think the biggest differences in a lot of the reels out there is simply the size of the reel that you go with. I really like the 2500 to 3000 series size reels. I think, to me, that works really, really well. There's kind of been a trend, especially if you're like a smallmouth fisherman, for guys who use like bigger reels, like up to 4,000 size reels. I'm not one of those guys. I don't really love that. It's a bigger reel, obviously, and there's some advantages there, but I like kind of that 2500 to 3000 series. Either one of those is a really good size reel that you can do a lot with, not just Wacky rigs. This particular one is the ARC Gravity, and this is also a 3000 series right here. It's the GSS 3000. So that's kind of the biggest thing with the reel. Another big thing is you always want to make sure you have a really smooth drag, which this particular reel does. A lot of your spinning reels these days do have a very smooth drag, and I definitely use the drag a lot more with spinning combo than a bait cast combo. So now let's move on to the next thing, and this is where you're going to hear a lot of people kind of all over the place when it comes to what they like, and that goes with your line. Now, to me, for most of my finesse techniques, I really like a braid to fluorocarbon leader. That is what I'm going to use all the time. One of the biggest reasons that I like it with a Wacky rig specifically, though, is because a lot of times I am going to change my fluorocarbon pound test depending on where I'm fishing it. There are times where I'm fishing for big fish that are near cover, you know, under docks, in laydowns, and I'm using a Wacky rig. In those situations, I like to go with almost 14, you know, I've used even 16-pound fluorocarbon before as my leader, kind of a heavier leader than a lot of guys might do. And so I like to be able to switch out that leader to something heavier if I'm fishing for big fish around heavy cover. Now, if I'm fishing more open water situations, or maybe I'm fishing for fish that are just simply smaller, maybe I'm fishing in a pond that doesn't have a whole lot of cover besides grass, maybe they just got a lot of 2-pound fish in there, I like to use 8-pound tests. A lot of times if I can get around with 8-pound tests, you know, fluorocarbon, I'm gonna use that because I feel like it will help me to get more bites. So using a braid to fluorocarbon leader allows me to change that leader out without really disrupting my whole spool. You know, like you could probably get away with just using a straight 10-pound mono or fluoro if you really wanted to, and that would be a kind of an all-around good line if you want just a straight mono or fluoro, but I really like the braid to fluoro. As far as the braid goes, when I first started fishing braided lines on my spinning reels, I was using 20-pound test braid, and you can do that. Over time, I just continue to get lower and lower with my pound test, and I've really kind of settled on using 10-pound Power Pro line. To me, the 10-pound original Power Pro, which is a 4-carrier braid, that stuff to me is indestructible. I have caught so many fish, big ones. I've caught 6-pounders on Chickamauga with 10-pound braid. I've caught tons of smallmouth across the country, especially in the northern part of the country, with that 10-pound braid. And I really like 10-pound. If you were to rig up the exact same rod and reel with 10-pound braid versus 20-pound braid, you would notice a humongous difference in just the way that that braid handles and your castability. And I didn't really realize it until I started stepping down. When I started stepping down, I realized that I could cast baits a lot further. Now, This is really more important when you're using really light finesse rigs. You know, if I'm using really tiny hair jigs or little baits that are really, really small, that's where using that light braid really comes in to hand. And to be honest, a Wacky rig, you could probably get away with that 20 pound. I just use 10 pound because again, it's an all around thing for me. Like I use this rod for a lot of techniques, not just a Wacky rig, but I do like it for a Wacky rig. So anyways, that is kind of what I like. One thing that I really want to talk with you real quick about when it comes to the Wacky rig is with your line is also the size of your leader. And when I first tie up a leader, I like to go where that leader is basically in between my reel and my first guide when I first tie this up. Now I've actually used this and retied a couple times. You can see my knot is actually right here. But when I start, usually my knot is about right here and my lure will be hanging right about near my rod. So that's somewhere kind of in that, you know, 12, I'd say, to 14 foot range. To me, you can get you can cast really well. You can get, I use an FG knot, by the way. You can cast really well. You can do a lot. And that's kind of the leader length that I like. One quick other thing that you're gonna wanna know about a Wacky rig that's really important is the hook that you use. Now, the style of hook that you use is not as important to me as the thickness of the hook that you use. There are a lot of hooks on the market that are very light wire hooks. And if you're using a Wacky rig like this, where you're like me, you just hook it through the bait like that and you start casting it, those light wire hooks are a lot more susceptible to actually cutting through your bait. And that's when you go to make a cast underneath of a dock and all of a sudden your bait is just skipping and your hook stopped. So I actually like to go with a little bit more of a medium wire hook when it comes to my Wacky rigs. And I'm telling you what, you wouldn't think it would make that big of a difference because it's so minuscule looking at a light wire hook versus a medium wire hook, but it makes a huge difference on the amount of fish you can catch with one bait before it comes off of there. So you could also use an O-ring. I'm just not really an O-ring guy. But anyways, that's it, guys. That's the Wacky rig setup. And I hope you guys enjoy kind of this equipment series. I'm gonna leave the playlist for this series right over here so you can see all the videos that I've done so far in this series. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to check out Omnium, and I will see you guys tomorrow.